Good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you may be listening to this podcast. We are here to run down the headlines that you should be seeing, but you probably aren't. That is, unless you are on peterdegedo.com. This is where you see the news before it's news. I'm proud to say that the headlines that you see on Peter Degedo, they don't usually hit the mainstream conservative news and airwaves and websites about 24 to 48 hours later. So if you're looking for the freshest news, the most unique perspectives, the most interesting articles on the internet from a Christian libertarian perspective, then peterdegedo.com is the place for that. So let's go through some of the headlines that we have for today on this Tuesday, September the 19th. The latest post on Peter Degedo is about our beloved CIA. It's their 70th birthday today. So happy birthday to the Central Intelligence Agency. And the article has from 7 truly terrible things the CIA has done in the 70 years they've been together. This is by Carey Wedler from the Anti-Media or antimedia.org, which is a phenomenal source of information. Here they've gone through seven of the I guess their 7 worst things the CIA has pulled off and done publicly. That is, I think that I may have a few additions on my own, but nevertheless, Carey Wedler's list starts with number one, toppling governments around the world. Yeah, I think that that is something that we all, as Americans, have come to realize that the CIA is actively involved, had been involved, especially in Central and South America, involved in overthrows of duly elected governments. Now, don't get me wrong; those duly elected governments were not the most friendly to the United States, and we are a sovereign government, a sovereign power, and um, I feel that all governments are trying to do things around the world for the betterment of themselves. Maybe that may has not been happening while maybe our President Obama was in office, and we felt the ramifications of that. I think President Trump is turning that particular ship around, and it's American first policy. But I think the jury is still out on that. My wife, in particular, um, is not convinced on the bona fides of Donald J. Trump. I, on the other hand, have I don't know if you call me a Kool-Aid drinker, but I am definitely on board the Trump train. I think that, for better or worse, he definitely has the best interests of Americans in mind. Although over these past couple weeks, we've seen some things that would maybe lead some people to think otherwise. I guess that is a topic for another day. Getting back to Carey Wedler from antimedia.org's article, her op-ed here, toppling governments around the world. I think she starts with the Shah in Iran uh, back in 1979. I think that I'm sorry, excuse me, going back to 1954 in Guatemala, the Congo in 1960, the Dominican Republic in 1961, South Vietnam 1963, Brazil 1964, Chile 1973, and of course we know the Iranian situation that we had, the Iranian Islamic revolution in 1979, which was a direct blowback, a, a term coined by the CIA for the things that they had been doing around the world and the blowback that they had been receiving. I think that may be one of the most longest lasting um, knife still hanging over us of some of these things that have been going on with the CIA around the world. Number two on her list is Operation Paperclip. And for any of you who don't know this, I am a history buff. That is my liberal arts degree is in history. It's American history, but nevertheless, history is history, I guess you could say. And I have a fascination with history, and especially World War II history. And Operation Paperclip comes right out of World War II. Um, There's a when we took over Germany, we found uh, there's a lot of Nazis out there, a lot of different kinds of Nazis, scientists, rocket scientists, chemical engineers, pharmaceutical doctors, um, lots of very intellectually powerful people, and the United States government, or at least the Central Intelligence Agency, decided that it would be in our best interest to not put those particular people on any kind of trial to make them pay for their crimes, but instead to use their intellectual prowess for to fight the good fight, I guess you could say. And Operation Paperclip was that particular operation to gather those scientists around Nazi Germany and get them on the American payroll or bring them back to America before the Soviets could get their hands on them, which I do understand the Soviet Union was doing the same thing. It was seeking out Nazi scientists in particular to advance their own intellectual capabilities, I think mostly in rocket science and nuclear physics in particular. But nevertheless, as we all know, the Manhattan Project and some of the Albert Einstein and some of the most famous scientists of that time were Nazi Jewish refugees. And so Operation Paperclip, I guess, folded the rest of those those former Jewish colleagues, went and got their Nazi former colleagues and brought them to the United States. Werner von Braun being one of the most prominent of those people, and of course he was a rocket scientist. Number three that Corey has here from antimedia.org is here we go. Sorry about that. My computer kind of had a little its own little blip here. Operation Chaos. And Operation Chaos in particular was a counterintelligence operation to fight communism in post-war Europe. As we know, after World War II, Europe was split into two spheres of influence, a communist and a capitalist sections of Europe, and we were during that time in particular very sensitive to the fact that communism was a global phenomenon, a multinational ideological persuasion, and we need to do a lot of, it was almost at all costs to prevent the spread of communism, especially in Europe. Europe at that time, and I think still at this time, is still our most powerful and strategic partner, and there's no way we could let the European continent slip into the total sphere of the Soviets. So Operation Chaos was put into place. Domestic spying on Americans from the Vietnam War. That's Vietnam at this particular time is an incredibly hot button topic. I think as almost any or most wars are. There has been, I think, a few exceptions, but I think those exceptions are more put under the radar by the media. I think there's always an anti-war sentiment in the United States. It's just who we are as a people. It's just who and how much does the media put out front for us to see. But nevertheless, Operation Chaos was not only, preventing Soviet infiltration in Europe, but it was also here in the United States, infiltrating anti-Vietnam War protest groups to flush out any Soviet communist infiltrators. Number four she has is infiltrating the media itself. Uh, I believe this is, she doesn't have it listed here, but it's Operation Mockingbird, and this is most Americans, I think, are willfully ignorant or willfully blissfully ignorant about this particular topic because they wouldn't dream that our government is actively using propaganda against us and has been for a very long time. Even since the since World War II, and we can go back to World War I and the tight control the Wilson administration had on outgoing information. War propaganda, war, what's being put out there in the public is, I think a lot of people think that it's a free press, and sometimes it is, but I think in particular times of war, it really is not. And what we're finding, and what's even more alarming, is that when we're not at war, how much the government and the CIA is actively involved in the propagandizing and the indoctrination of the people. The young ones are easy, but we're all susceptible to indoctrination and propaganda. The author here, Carey, she talks about, from movies, Argo, Zero Dark 30, the shows Homeland and 24. If you notice that all of these shows always give a positive a positive feeling of the CIA, that they're the good guys, that it's not always cut and dry about the most ethical things to do, but that the CIA is operating in the best interest of the United States, and that of everyone out there, they are the most ethical actors. And I would like to believe that. As Americans, we believe we are an exceptional people, an exceptional country, and so we feel that all of those government agents and things that represent us are in that same light. And I think sometimes when we see that it's not the case, we want to bury our heads in the sand, because it just cuts at the core of who we are as Americans. And sometimes the truth hurts the most. And so looking yourself in the mirror and seeing what your family is doing can be tough sometimes. The I think for me, one of the most, this may have been number one for me, is the drug-induced mind control. For our internet folks out there who've been in the game a little bit longer, you know this as MK Ultra. MK Ultra was officially disbanded or ended, I believe, in the 1970s, 80s. But I do not think that program has ever stopped. There has been hot debate on the mass shooters. They all seem to be on psychotropic medication. They all kind of seem to set a certain profile. They all seem to have the same profile that the MK Ultra, folks had identified as susceptible to mind control. Now, whether it's just a fluke of, well, those folks are susceptible to mind control, so they're more likely to do crazy things like kill, tens or twenties, or as many people as they possibly can. I don't know, but nevertheless, the fact that our government secretly was using drugs to experiment on American citizens, prisoners or not, to test mind control, and then you know, uh, when I look at it as the success they had in the testing phase, and then all of a sudden they just end it, for me that looks like it went operational. That the testing was over, the testing was successful, and so it needed to go black bag, black box. So, me personally, I think that's what happened to MK Ultra. When you have someone who can be completely mind warped, mind controlled, brainwashed, there's complete anonymity. There's that layer of protection from the people who give the orders on what needs to be done. So that for me, MK Ultra is definitely one of the more scary things. As someone who's, I'm not a very adept person at physical labor, putting things together. I can sure take something apart, but putting it together, not so much. I've always made and provided for my family with my mind and my mouth. So to have someone take that away from you, I can't. That for me is something that is quite scary. So as someone who is vocal in his opinions, I definitely understand that there's people like me who are targets of people who are mind controlled. With this whole triggering, I can't believe that the word, triggering is something that adults in the 21st century are talking about. Triggering, that's something that, I would think that autistic children